He was just the janitor, sweeping floors, emptying bins, invisible to everyone. Until one cocky black belt laughed and said, "Want to spar for fun?" What happened next made the entire dojo freeze in silence. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. You could hear a pin drop in the dojo that day, not because of the usual discipline or silent focus, but because something was different. Everyone's eyes were glued to the mat, not to admire the black belt in the center, but to stare, wide-eyed, at the man standing across from him, the janitor. Every day, Mr. Elijah quietly came in before sunrise. He swept the floors, wiped the mirrors, disinfected the mats, and took out the trash. He rarely said a word. Always in that same worn gray hoodie, cap pulled low over his brow, blending into the background like part of the building. The kids at the dojo barely noticed him. To most, he was just the janitor. No one asked his name. No one paid him any mind. But that day was different. It started with a sparring session during the black belt's advanced class. A new teen named Marcus had recently joined. Tall, cocky, and strong. He was a second-degree black belt who transferred from another dojo and wasted no time establishing himself as the top dog. During warm-ups, he loudly boasted about the dojos he'd trained in, bragged about taking down older opponents, said this place was too soft. Everyone was tired of hearing him talk, but no one had the guts to call him out. No one, except for Mr. Elijah. As Marcus strutted toward the mat for his next sparring round, he laughed loudly and pointed to Elijah, who had just finished mopping the floor near the entrance. "Hey, old man," he called out. "You ever think about joining the class? Or do you just clean up after real fighters?" The room went silent. Even the sensei raised an eyebrow. Elijah didn't say anything at first. He just placed the mop against the wall, calmly walked toward the mat, and adjusted his hoodie. Then he spoke, softly but clearly. "Want to spar?" Laughter erupted from the back. A few of the younger kids looked nervous. Was he serious? Marcus laughed, cracking his knuckles. "Sure, why not? Just don't trip over your mop." Sensei hesitated. "Mr. Elijah, are you certain?" Elijah simply nodded. "I won't hurt him." They bowed in. Marcus grinned, bouncing on his heels like he was already celebrating the win. Elijah stood still, motionless, calm, like a stone in a river. The moment the sensei gave the signal, Marcus lunged forward with a high kick, fast and sharp, but in a blur of movement. Elijah wasn't there. He'd stepped aside with barely any motion, hand brushing the kick aside like swatting a fly. Gasps echoed around the dojo. Marcus came again, this time with a combo. Punch, elbow, kick, all sharp, all confident. None of them landed. Elijah moved with grace and silence, like he had seen it all before. Every attack was dodged before it was even finished. It wasn't just skill, it was mastery. Then, in one swift motion, Elijah stepped forward. A soft tap on Marcus's shoulder, a gentle sweep of the leg, and the cocky black belt hit the mat. Hard. Everyone froze. Even Marcus. Elijah didn't gloat. He just offered a hand and helped him up. The room was dead silent. And then, for the first time, Elijah pulled down his hood, scars on his knuckles, a faded tattoo of a dragon on his forearm. His calm eyes looked around the room, then back at Marcus. "I taught at the Shaolin Temple for 8 years, he said quietly. "Then I trained in Okinawa. But after I lost my son, I stopped teaching. This job? It pays the bills." He picked up his mop and walked back to the corner. The dojo was never the same after that. Kids started greeting him by name. Mr. Elijah. They listened when he gave advice. Some even stayed after class to ask him questions. And Marcus? He apologized. Then, asked for private lessons. Sometimes, greatness hides in plain sight. Not behind titles or belts, but in humility, patience, and quiet strength. That day, the dojo learned something they'd never forget. Respect isn't earned by what's around your waist, but by how you carry yourself when no one's looking. Jordan was the dojo's star student. 17 years old. Fast, strong, and loud. He had just earned his black belt the month before, and every day since, he made sure no one forgot it. After each sparring session, he'd strut around the mat like a peacock, fists raised high. He was good, very good, but what he had in speed, he lacked in humility. That day, the dojo was packed. Parents were watching from the benches. Lower belts stood in silent rows along the wall. Jordan had just flattened another brown belt in. Under 30 seconds that he stood over him, grinning. "Who's next?" he barked, laughing as he tossed his gloves to the side. "Come on, don't be shy. Who else wants to spar?" No one moved. Jordan's eyes scanned the room, hunting for another victim. Then he spotted movement by the far wall. It was Elijah, the janitor, pushing in his usual mop and bucket, ready to clean the side mirrors. Jordan smirked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You up for a match, old man?" The room chuckled. Some of the kids snorted. A voice from the back shouted, "He's got a broom. Maybe he'll sweep you off your feet." Laughter erupted. But Elijah? He didn't flinch. He looked up slowly, eyes calm, voice quiet. "I don't fight for fun." Jordan grinned, walking toward him, scared. The instructor was about to speak, already raising a hand to shut it down, when Elijah did something no one expected. He reached up, removed his cap, then, slowly, pulled off his hoodie. Gasps rippled through the dojo beneath. The faded hoodie was a GI top, old, worn, faded from years of washing. But what caught everyone's eye was the belt tied around his waist. A black belt. But not just any black belt. This one was cracked and fraying at the edges, faded to the point it looked almost gray. The kind of belt that had seen decades of training, not just a few years. You could feel the temperature in the room change. The instructor's eyes widened. "That belt. Elijah, you're..." But Elijah simply nodded. "Used to be." Jordan blinked, caught off guard. You're a black belt?" Elijah tied his belt tighter. "I trained for 20 years. Taught for 10. Retired after my son passed. Took this job to stay close to the art, without the noise." Jordan's grin faltered, but pride wouldn't let him back down. Then, "How about a quick round, sensei?" he said, voice still cocky, though his stance wasn't quite as steady. Elijah glanced at the instructor, who gave a hesitant nod. And just like that, it was on. The students stepped back. Silence took over. You could hear every breath, every shuffle of feet. Jordan bounced on his toes, fists up, eyes narrowed. Elijah stood relaxed, hands at his sides. Not tense, not flashy, just still. The instructor raised a hand. "Begin." Jordan moved first, quick jab, sharp kick. But Elijah didn't move. He glided at a sidestep, a duck, a light tap to Jordan's wrist, redirecting, not resisting. Jordan came harder this time, spinning elbow, low sweep. But Elijah was already gone, ghost-like in his movements. He didn't block, he flowed. And then, with a single step forward, he tapped Jordan's shoulder. Lightly, Jordan staggered. Another movement, smoother than silk, and Jordan's legs were swept out from beneath him. He hit the mat with a dull thud. The dojo was silent. No one laughed now. Elijah stepped back and offered a hand. Jordan stared up at him, eyes wide, breathing hard. He took the hand. Elijah pulled him up, firm but gentle. "Being strong doesn't mean being loud," he said quietly. "It means knowing when not to fight." Jordan swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir." After that day, everything changed. Jordan still trained hard, but he started listening more, bowed deeper, spoke softer. Students began greeting Elijah with respect, using his real name. Some even stayed behind to ask him about forms, history, and technique. And Elijah? He never showed off, never asked to teach. But sometimes, late in the evening, you'd catch him guiding a younger student, correcting their stance or adjusting their breathing. He never did it for praise, that he did it for the art. And so, the janitor, once invisible, became something more. A living lesson in humility, discipline, and quiet strength. The dojo never forgot. Because real black belts don't have to speak loud. They let their silence do the talking. The room fell completely silent. No chatter, no laughter, just the soft hum of the overhead lights and the thud of Elijah's quiet footsteps as he walked toward the center of the M.N.O. warm-up. No words, just presence. That he didn't stretch or loosen his limbs. He didn't bounce like the younger students did before a match. He simply stood still, centered and calm, like he'd been here 1,000 times before. Jordan, on the other hand, tried to laugh off his nerves. "All right then," he said with a forced smirk. "Let's go easy, janitor." Some of the students chuckled, but Elijah didn't respond. They bowed, and in the very next second, Jordan lunged. He came fast, aiming a right hook toward Elijah's side. It was strong, fast, and clean. But Elijah didn't resist that he stepped. Just slightly to the left, pivoted on his heel, and turned his body with Jordan's force. His hand guided Jordan's wrist as if showing him where to go, redirecting, not fighting that Jordan's own momentum betrayed him. Before he could recover, his foot slid, and then, thud, he was on the ground. The dojo gasped. No one expected that. Not from the janitor. Jordan scrambled up, face flushed. The smirk was gone. Now, he was serious. He bounced lightly on his feet, fists raised, eyes locked in. His pride was on the line, and he wasn't going to lose it that easily. He charged again, this time with a combo, left jab, low kick, spin into a reverse punch. But Elijah moved like water that he didn't block, he flowed. Every motion Jordan made was met with effortless redirection. A shift of the shoulders, a sway of the hips, like watching someone dance through a storm without getting wet. And then, tapped out. Elijah's open palm landed gently on Jordan's shoulder at a clean point that Jordan's eyes widened. He reset, came in again, more calculated, strike, block, pivot, but again, tap, another clean point. The room was frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. Jordan's breaths grew heavier. His face tightened with frustration. He rushed in, one last time, heart pounding, movements sharp and wild. But Elijah remained centered. A sidestep, a turn, a final tap, this time on Jordan's chest point. 3 strikes, 3 taps, 3 silent lessons. Jordan stopped. His arms dropped. He stepped back, breathing hard, heart pounding, not just from exertion, but from realization. Elijah bowed slowly. Jordan bowed back. The instructor stepped forward. Match over. But no one clapped. No one cheered, because everyone in the room had just witnessed something deeper. Later, when the crowd had dispersed and the younger students were packing up, a few approached Elijah with wide eyes and soft voices. How did you move like that? Can you teach me that footwork? Were you really a master? Elijah smiled, wiping down the mirrors like always. I'm still learning, just like you. One of the parents quietly asked the instructor, who is he? The instructor simply said, a black belt, in more ways than one. That night, Jordan stayed behind. He sat on the bench, watching Elijah mop the floor just like he did every evening. I didn't understand before, he finally said. I thought being a black belt meant being the strongest in the room. Elijah paused, then looked at him. No, he said softly. It means knowing when not to use it. Jordan nodded slowly. Those taps, he added, voice low. What were they? Elijah put the mop down, walked over, and looked him in the eye. Control, timing, humility. Then he walked away. From that day forward, everything changed. Jordan trained harder, but with quieter confidence. He stopped bragging, stopped showing off. He listened more, respected more. Students began watching Elijah differently, not as the janitor, but as something more. He never asked for recognition, never took the spotlight, but his lessons stayed in the room long after he left. And those 3 taps? They echoed, not just in Jordan's memory, but in the hearts of every student who had witnessed that match. Because sometimes, the most powerful lessons aren't shouted, they're delivered with silence, with grace, with 3 simple taps. After the match, the room was still breathless. You could feel the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air, like a truth no one could unsee. Elijah, calm as ever, reached out a hand and helped Jordan to his feet. You've got power, he said softly, but you fight to prove, not to learn. Jordan, red-faced and winded, didn't argue. He just nodded, humbled. The instructor, still standing near the edge of the mat, stepped forward, his expression a mix of shock and awe. Mr. Elijah, he began, where did you train? Elijah gave a quiet smile, tugging his hoodie back over his shoulders. I used to teach, he replied. Started with Shotokan, then Muay Thai. Competed in national tournaments. Spent time training special units, military contracts. But after my son passed, I walked away. Too much noise. Too much pain. He looked around the dojo, eyes softer now. Cleaning helped me stay grounded. Gave me peace. This place reminded me of what martial arts is supposed to be. The students were frozen. Some stood awkwardly, still gripping their gloves or clutching their belts. Others just stared, as if seeing Elijah for the very first time. This man they passed by every day. This man they ignored. This man they joked about. He was more than the mop he held. He was a master. Some of the younger students lowered their eyes, visibly ashamed. They remembered laughing at him, avoiding eye contact, walking around his mop bucket like he didn't matter. But now, he mattered more than anyone. Jordan, still catching his breath, took a slow step forward. He looked Elijah in the eye and bowed deeply, a full 90 degrees. "I'm sorry, sir," he said quietly. "I thought you were just—" Elijah raised a hand and interrupted, gently but firmly. "You thought wrong." He looked around the room, letting the silence settle in before he spoke again. "Never measure someone by their job or their clothes," he said. "Some people wear power on their waist. Others carry it in silence." He tapped his heart. "Respect is not earned by belts. It's earned by how we treat others." The instructor nodded slowly. Words to live by. After that day, the dojo change.it wasn't announced. No one made a speech. But the atmosphere shifted in ways that couldn't be ignored. Students began greeting Elijah with a bow when he entered. Some stayed behind after class to help him clean the mats. Others sat with him during breaks, asking about techniques, forms, stories from the past he never boasted. Never demanded attention. But when he spoke, everyone listened. Even Jordan, especially. Jordan that he became one of the most improved students, not just in skill, but in attitude. He listened more, talked less, and treated everyone with equal respect, white belt or black belt. And when younger students asked why he changed, he simply said, "Because I finally understood what a black belt means." Months later, the instructor officially offered Elijah a position on the teaching staff. Elijah smiled politely and declined. "I appreciate it," he said, "but I don't need a title to teach. I'll be here. Same time every day, mop in hand. But if a student asks to learn, I'll be ready." And he was. Some evenings, you'd find him showing a quiet child how to perfect their stance, or explaining the rhythm of breathing during sparring. Sometimes, he just listened, offering peace in a place often ruled by noise. The belt around Elijah's waist wasn't just black, it was nearly white again from decades of use. But no one doubted its worth, because it wasn't the belt that made the man.it was the man who gave meaning to the belt. And in the end, the lesson everyone walked away with that day wasn't about power or speed or winning.it was this: never underestimate the quiet ones, because sometimes the person mopping the floor has the deepest wisdom in the room. The next week, Elijah was no longer just the janitor. His story had spread like wildfire through the dojo. Parents whispered about it in the lobby. Students recounted the match between him and Jordan with wide eyes and reverent tones. Even the youngest white belts, who barely understood the art, sensed something had changed. The dojo's head instructor called Elijah into his office with a proposal. "Join us officially as an assistant instructor. We need someone like you, someone who teaches with heart." Elijah smiled kindly and nodded, but added, "I'll accept on one condition." The instructor raised a brow. "Which is?" "I still want to clean, mop the mats, wipe the mirrors, empty the bins. That's part of the practice, too." The instructor blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because it keeps me grounded," Elijah said. "It reminds me I'm no better than anyone else, and that every role, seen or unseen, matters." It wasn't about pride for Elijah. It never was. From that day on, Elijah wore two hats to in the early morning and late evening. He was the janitor, mop in hand, quiet and steady. During classes, he was Sensei Elijah, a quiet force of nature who moved with grace, taught with patience, and rarely raised his voice that he didn't need to. His presence commanded attention, not with power, but with wisdom. He became the dojo's most respected figure. Not because of his black belt, not because of his past titles or tournament wins, but because of his character that he listened more than he spoke. He offered advice only when asked. And when he taught, he made each student feel seen, understood. Students who once snickered behind his back now sat cross-legged on the mat in silence, hanging on to every word he spoke. When Elijah demonstrated a technique, it wasn't flashy, but it was flawless. And when he corrected a student, he did it with kindness, not criticism. Even parents began to notice the difference. "He's not like other instructors," one mother whispered. "He teaches more than martial arts," said another. "He teaches respect." But perhaps the most noticeable change wasn't in Elijah. It was in Jordan. Gone was the cocky teen who flaunted his black belt like a trophy. The loud entrances, the trash talk, the arrogance, all gone. Instead, Jordan began showing up early, not to train, but to clean. That he started sweeping the floors before class, mopping the mats afterward. At first, people thought it was some punishment. But when asked, Jordan would shake his head. I just want to help. He stopped showing off and sparring. He began helping white belts tie their GIs, coaching nervous students through warm-ups, and clapping the loudest when others succeeded. He no longer fought to prove himself, that he fought to learn, to grow, to serve, and most importantly, he remembered how he once mocked Elijah, how he assumed a man's worth based on a mop and hoodie, and he never wanted to make that mistake again. So whenever someone, especially a younger student, laughed at another kid's effort, or dismissed someone because they didn't look strong, Jordan was always the first to step in. He'd place a hand on their shoulder and say quietly, don't underestimate people. I did once, and I'm still learning from it. As months passed, the dojo grew stronger, not just in skill, but in spirit. Elijah never asked for recognition. He didn't need a name on the wall or a plaque, but every student knew. He was the heart of the dojo, a living reminder that greatness isn't always loud, that wisdom doesn't wear flashy clothes, and that sometimes the most powerful teachers come disguised in humble roles. And when new students asked who he was, older ones would smile and say, that's Elijah. He cleans the mats. He teaches the masters. And if you're lucky, he'll teach you too. Because in the end, Elijah's greatest lesson wasn't how to punch, kick, or block. It was this: true respect has nothing to do with rank. It's how you carry yourself when no one's watching, and how you treat the ones everyone else overlooks. Respect isn't about titles, uniforms, or belts. It's about how we treat people when no one's watching. Today, a janitor taught us a lesson no textbook ever could. True strength is quiet, humble, and kind. Folded hands if this story moved you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And remember, you never know who's watching or who's teaching. Speech balloon backhand index pointing down. Drop a comment. Have you ever been surprised by someone's hidden strength?